We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bring news just for you. Good morning, everyone. It's Friday, December 13th, and welcome to News Generation. This is Cheska Dinehong, and I'll be replacing our senior Jin till today. She'll be back with us starting next Monday. Now, in the studio this morning, we're joined by In Sang-hyuk.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It's finally Friday.
Oh, yeah, finally Friday.
Final Friday. And Lee Won-bin.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Now, today is Friday, so we will delve straight into our main topic. Now, we prepared a scintillating discussion on an issue that is extremely relevant to our generation, social media. Now, recently, Australia became the first country to pass a bill on social media ban for underage users, now bringing to surface a number of very important questions regarding the age limit, penalties on tech companies, and even perhaps personal freedom. Now, before we begin our main discussion, I want to do a quick survey among our panelists here. Now, Sang-hyuk, how old were you when you first started using your social media?
Well, I was in 7th grade, and at the time, the platform called Cyword was really popular among our generation, and I think Won-bin is going to freak out when he hears this. But yeah, actually, Cyword was like today's Instagram back in the days.
Right, so you started very young in 7th grade. What about you, Won-bin?
My case is very similar with Sang-hyuk. Instead, like he just mentioned, instead of Cyworld, it was the great Facebook era for me. So besides that, it was pretty much the same, around middle school.
Around middle school, wow. So everyone started very young in this studio. And the reason that I asked our panelists before we started was to illustrate that age is clearly not an issue when it comes to accessing social media. But the real issue starts once we have the access to it. Now, beginning in the studio today, we want to pose a question about the Australia that passed the law to tackle this issue head on. Now, Sang-hyuk, could you tell us about the details of the law?
Yeah, so like you mentioned in the opening, the Australian government recently legislated a law banning teenagers aged below 16 from logging into social media, even though their parents allow them to do so. And if a social media platform violates this law, the company will be fined up to 50 million Australian dollars, that is around 32 million in US dollars. However, the teenagers that made an access to the social media as well as their parents will not be punished. So the pilot enforcement will start from January and official execution will take place in November next year.
Now, as you mentioned, this is a very interesting aspect of the law because it targets and punishes the platform companies, but not the actual underage users or their parents. Now, Won-bin, could you tell us about the varying parties that might be affected by the law once it's set in motion?
Yes, of course. Interesting part about this issue is that, like the two mentioned, excuse me, while tech companies face penalties, teenagers and parents are exempt, which has sparked mixed reactions. Supporters of the law argue that it's necessary to protect minors from online dangers, while critics, particularly tech giants obviously, claim that it raises question about privacy and freedom of use. There's also some concern over how this will be enforced practically, which I am curious about it as well. But the general sentiment is that it is the right direction. It is a step to the right direction. Right,
and now that we have some background information, also learning about some mixed reception of the law, I think it would be great to hear directly from the source where all of this is happening. Let us now connect live with an Australian millennial to continue our discussion. Good morning, Alexandra. Hello. Today we're joined by Alexandra Phiem, a millennial living in Australia. Welcome to our show today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
And always wonderful to have you. Now let's begin with the first question. Australia became the first country to pass a bill that will effectively ban social media for users under 16. Now we're really curious, what is the general public's reaction to it?
I think you guys hit the nail on the head. It's been very, very mixed in Australia. A lot of parents and the politicians believe that this is the right way to go, that this is like the only way to help young people who have had mental health experiences and issues because of social media. However, a lot of young people and others believe that it might not be the right steps to take, and they have a lot of questions about the social media ban as well that haven't quite been answered yet. So things like, how will we get our ages verified on the social media platforms? Will we have to upload sensitive information like a passport or an ID? And these questions haven't exactly been answered yet. So we have a bit of confusion and a little bit of trepidation towards the ban.
I see, okay.
Okay, so Alexandra, as you know, there is an ongoing debate about social media regulation across the world. And in fact, Australia has taken the first lead in actually regulating these social platforms. And what do you think that drove Australia to be the first country to do so?
Well, unfortunately, this year there were, and over the past few years, but specifically this year, there have been a string of young Australians who have taken their own lives. And a lot of it is due to bullying in schools, and that has a flow-on effect with social media. So that was really the big reason why this social media ban has happened. And it's encouraging because it's supposed to regulate the safety barrier for young people and kids, and it's supposed to also encourage better mental health because they won't be so glued to their phone and surrounded by negative, nasty messages that infiltrate their social media, which is a very big problem with young people, especially because they are so young, their brains are still developing, and they're not, fully aware of the world properly yet. So if they introduced to bullying and things with social media, it can have absolutely horrible effects.
All right, very well said, Alexandra. I highly agree with you. And what are your thoughts on how we can further address this social media usage for underage minors?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there's no silver bullet for this because the saying is once you take the toothpaste out of the tube, you can't put it back in. So I think that this is one step that we're taking, to try and combat the mental health problem with young people and social media. But there are a lot of things that we can do. I think that schools have a responsibility to make sure that they know what's going on within their building. Social media platforms have to make better strides to actually protect young people, banning and censoring certain language and words that might be detrimental to their mental health. And I also think that parents need to take bigger steps to monitoring what their children are doing. So from a personal experience, my parents had access to my passwords until I was about 16 years old for social media. They never checked anything, but the fact that that they had access to my accounts sort of gave them a bit of relief, knowing that they could go through if anything was wrong and see what was going on behind the scenes. So I think that parents also need to step up a little bit too. But this is just one of the many things that we need to take into consideration to help young people because it's such a big issue and we really want to protect the next generation.
And I absolutely agree with you. And I think you summed it up perfectly. There is no silver bullet because there are so many moving parts. But based on the discussion with you, we will unfold this step by step in today's news generation. Thank you so much, Alexandra.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now let us delve a little bit deeper, step by step. Now Australia is indeed the first country to actually legalize the social media ban, but this movement, or attempt should I say, to regulate underage users is not really something new. It has been going on quite for some time in other countries, right, Sanya?
Yeah, so in fact, right now, other countries are also joining Australia's movement in regulating their social media platform. So let's all take a look at the screen. Last year, France enforced a law that mandated teenagers to receive their parents' agreement before using social media. Otherwise, if the teenager attempts to sign in, their account will be automatically blocked from the platform. And the UK is currently coming up with legal regulation to prohibit teenagers under 16 from using social media platform. As for the US, states like Texas and Florida built measures to restrict the access on social media targeting minors.
Now let's bring the focus here. Wonbi, what are we doing in South Korea?
In Korea, we have implemented several measures over the years. For example, shutdown law is a good example. It's a law that stops minors from playing video games past midnight. However, when it comes to social media, there hasn't been anything practical. Recently, there's been a growing discussion about a similar age-based restrictions that we've been talking about, but nothing concrete has been established yet. And yes.
Okay, and when we want to understand a social phenomena such as what we're discussing today, I think it is very important to go to the root of it all, because for something to be set as a law, let's face it, the issue must have been pretty serious and had some social urgency, right, Wonbin? So
Excellent.
exactly how rampant and serious are the problems being caused by social media?
These issues are very serious and cannot be ignored. For example, in Australia, a 16-year-old boy was influenced by extremists on social media and ended up attacking a church official. And similarly, there have been tragic cases where predators use social media to lure minors, like a 15-year-old girl who has been killed after being lured online. However, it's not just about physical harm, and studies, including the one from U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, show that teenagers who spend over 3 hours on social media every day are more than twice vulnerable from having mental health issues like depression and anxiety. The scale of this problem is alarming, and they highlight the need for stricter controls.
And you're absolutely right in that. But it is also unfortunate, and I don't want to say too much negativity, but South Korea is no exception, right? Because the web space here sometimes travel too far and too deep.
Right, and in fact, South Korea is the powerhouse of technology and
Yes,
IT
indeed.
platforms, so we are no exception here. And in fact, our teenagers can always easily access malicious information through social media, and issues like drugs, gambling, and deepfake sexual content are becoming rampant these days. In fact, 7 out of 10 deepfake criminals turned out to be teenagers. And as Wonbin just mentioned, depression driven by excessive use of smartphones is another issue that is damaging the Korean society. So according to the research carried out by Korean psychoanalytic research team based on 50,000 Korean teenagers, it has been found that teenagers who spend more than 4 hours a day using smartphones are more vulnerable to get depression and eventually commit suicide.
You know, everything we discussed are exactly the type of serious, I would say sometimes almost tragic
Right.
problems that we try to tackle and this law intends to address. But there are also concerns regarding legal restrictions and limitations being posed on an environment or ecosystem that supposedly flourished just because of its freedom and lack of control. What are some of its mixed reception?
One of the main concerns is that social media could limit personal freedoms. It's regulating social media. Critics argue that these laws stretch the boundary of safety rules, where governments or companies could impose further restrictions on what users can see or do online, because this gives them somewhat of a loophole for media manipulation. And there's also a question of enforcement. How do we ensure regulations are applied fairly amongst everyone? On the other side, supporters believe that there is some level of control is necessary to create a safer online space, especially for minors. It's a delicate balance between protecting users and preserving the freedom nature of social media.
It is such a tricky balance.
It
So
is.
What about you, Sang-Yeon? What are some other mixed receptions against regulation?
Well, I think whenever we have this kind of issues in the past, especially here in Korea, when the game addiction became really serious social issues, the policymakers tried to regulate the media platforms, but eventually the Korean teenagers were well equipped with tech-savvy skills, always find a way to circumvent the detection system. So here my question is, if the law bans teenagers from accessing social media, how are we going to detect all of those accesses, and what if new technology just pops out to nullify the initial purpose of this law? So our ultimate goal is to make teens be aware about harmful uses of smartphones, and to reach that goal, I think digital literacy education should come first. And this should be done not only in schools, but in homes as well. Parents should constantly monitor their kids on whether they are exposed to malicious content online, and they should also be an exemplary model for their kids and also reduce their time on the screen.
I absolutely agree, because as you brought up some really important points, the law and regulation may not be 100% bulletproof, so there should be absolutely additional measures. And for such a widely debated issue such as this, I think it is important to hear from different opinions. So a week ago, we posted a survey to hear directly from you, our viewers. Now take a look at the screen to find out. Now, the survey was on December 5th through the 11th for a week, and the question was, quote, should social media be banned for minors? Now, of the 1,100 votes, we had 78% who said yes, it's necessary, and 22% no, that's too extreme. Now, we also collected our viewers' comment. Now, Bittersweet 32 said minors don't bear full responsibility for their actions, including crimes, so it's reasonable to limit their rights in contexts where harm could occur. At least the 4154 said no, but there should be strict limits on content and probably enforced shut-off breaks, such as after 20 minutes. Now, thank you all to our viewers for their opinions. It is really important to hear from variety of opinions because, like we mentioned, social media has always been a double-edged sword, and there are many problems that result from it. Now, to wrap up our very heated discussion of the day, what are some things we can all do for not only a safe media environment, but also to provide a smart use of media space? Starting with you, Sang-yeok.
Well, apart from the efforts that individuals can make, I want to focus on what we can do as a whole, as a society. So I think here, now is the time to balance out between traditional media and the new media platform as well. So social media are deeply settled in everyday life, not only for engaging or hanging out with our friends, but also we can get useful information through Instagram and other platforms. And even some schools use this kind of social media platform for the education, and even when I teach my students at college, I make important notifications or assignment instructions via Kakao group chat. So as you can see, students have no choice but to download these apps, and they will eventually be exposed to other contents online as well. So I'm not against using these platforms, but I think it's time for us to cut back our reliance on these new platforms and resort to the traditional methods such as newspapers or TV.
That's a very interesting comment.
And someone who pursues analog lifestyle, I really highly recommend reading newspapers to get accurate and fact-based information. And personally, when it comes to educating children, I think we need to take a more conservative approach than usual. So making balance between the traditional and the new media would be crucial.
I think that's also important. And even though you're reading newspaper, please watch News Generation. What about you, Wonbin?
Yeah, I just want to add on from Sang-yeok, what Sang-yeok said. Sang-yeok just touched on the education part at the end, and I do believe that the key is education and balance for users, especially the young ones. Learning how to critically evaluate content is essential in 2024. And, excuse me, parents can play a huge role by setting boundaries and setting healthy social media habits. On a larger scale, tech companies need to step up with tools like content filters and screen time limits, which I have been seeing them recently. But it's not just about limiting the usage, it's about making sure people know how to use these platforms responsibly and safely. My biggest concern, personally, is that social media is becoming like an extreme news clipboard that is in the middle of a room full with teenagers who are very vulnerable to fake and distorted news. On top of that, the news or information is often just tossed without any background information or any context due to its nature of social media. A curriculum or a guideline seems absolutely necessary for me. And I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to controlling social media.
Right, and the reason that we had such an extensive discussion today here at News Generation, as both of our panelists mentioned and we talked about here in the studio, is because the ultimate solution may not be a complete ban or censorship, but we should not turn blind eye to the fact that there are actually problems happening precisely because of the lack of the control. And I hope our discussion today here at News Generation help you and help us to create a future where we can protect and also prevent.
Actually, I should be the first one to lessen my time on social media. So I learned a lot for today's episode.
And I think everyone who's watching, and myself included, I mean, we started when we were so young, so we're so used to these gadgets. And we're literally called the thumb generation for all the things that we do. So I hope that our episode today, and especially the law that is being set in Australia, does help people sort of re-examine how much time they're spending on social media. Now, thank you everyone for watching. Now, special thanks today to Im Sang-yeok.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and Wonbin.
Always a pleasure.
And we'll be back on Monday, 10:30 a.m. Korea time. Have a wonderful weekend. We are
News Generation.